Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Well, hello to my constant listener, hello to my semi-constant listener, and a very special welcome to my brand new listener. Today, I want to talk about dying alone. This isn't the first time I've contemplated dying alone or what occurs to a soul when they die alone. However, this is the first time I've considered dying alone in the grips of a global pandemic. I believe I am not the only person who has read or who has heard about individuals who have passed in their homes or in their other places of dwelling without another soul by them, in the grips of fear of this pandemic, knowing that breath won't come, knowing the cessation of life is near. How does a soul cope? How does a soul gain courage then? How has a soul gained courage throughout centuries of dying and disasters? A pandemic is a disaster, but we've had many disasters. Tsunamis, eruptions, Spanish flus. We have had our fair share of death in droves, death alone, and death terrified. But we are now living in a world of 7+ billion humans. Not every single one of those 7 billion+ humans are contemplating dying at the hands of an unseen virus. But I believe that many people are contemplating the level of death that could be or would be brought to the world. I believe that we have a raising of energetic trauma at this point that perhaps we have not experienced before, for the very simple reason we have not ever had 7+ billion people on the face of this planet. We have never had, say, 2.5 billion people focused on one particular event, likely or unlikely to occur to them, which is getting sick from an unknown and brand new virus. That creates an incredible psychic tension. It creates psychic wavelengths. How do those psychic wavelengths, how do the trauma around the body, trauma in the air, not only from the illness, we have a pandemic of financial destitution for many. Dying alone, what does that mean? Why am I talking about it? Because I think we're in a new place. I think that we have crossed a threshold of fear regarding death that I'm not certain we've ever really experienced collectively before. Dying alone. What does it mean to die alone when you have a community that is divided between the truth and untruth, whatever your truth is? I'm not defining truth for you respecting the virus. That's your reality, not mine. The contemplation of death in the time of a pandemic, in the time of panic, causes a tear to the psychic fabric that we are. What are the long-term effects of dying alone? What are the long-term effects of dying alone in utter fear when it is a focus of billions of people? How more intently does your soul experience the crossing over? This is a question I'm contemplating. Does the soul of the person dying alone during a time of social crisis cross over easier because people are praying for the dead they will never touch, see, or feel again? So is there a brighter light from this plane to that plane, from that plane to this plane? Or, and, not just or, can this type of pandemic fear, death fear, dying alone fear, create a suppression for the soul? Does it create a suppressive energy? So the soul is, in some form or other, trapped in the psychic wound of the whole. I have not journeyed on this. I have not sought answers. I am merely contemplating out loud. Perhaps you've already thought of this. Perhaps you have journeyed to this. And perhaps you have answers that your spirits have given you. I have contemplated how this is a different dying alone than the dying alone from centuries and centuries and centuries of dying alone. We all know of archaeologists who have discovered bones in various places, and the only way that the bones could be there is if there was an accidental death or a death quickly by a predator, by lightning, whatever might kill you at that particular point. My question to this point is, we have had multitudes of humans pass in fear while dying. We have had multitude of humans die alone. It is within our soul's structure to be able to transcend, ascend, descend, wherever you believe your soul goes. My contemplation refers to how do we cross when there is a barrier or a possible barrier? And how is this different than dying alone for the centuries prior? It is the contemplation of death and illness from a global perspective, global eye turning to a singular event, a singular reality. What does that do to the dying soul? If we already have that link or that ability to transcend, do we use it? I'm going to throw a bit of a side angle. There is a place where I live that housed many First Nations people and Inuit for tuberculosis. Tuberculosis became an entire generation of First Nations people's deaths, unaccounted for deaths, dying alone deaths. When I wanted to create ceremony for the dead from this particular place, the reason that I drove there, or the reason that I was driven to do ceremony there, was because of a journey that I did. In the journey, I was outside the building. I saw faces in the windows looking out. One soul walked towards me onto the grass, stood by my side and looked at the windows, and we talked about the souls stuck in that physical structure at length, the necessity or the agreement that the soul had when it came into this world, that it would have a proper burial, it would have a proper sending. The thought of the soul having an expectation of being remembered, of being sung across to the afterlife, of being taken to the afterlife, of being recognized and witnessed in the afterlife, is a potent piece of soul history, mystery, and necessity, perhaps even. I was very taken with compassion and willingness to help the souls that had been trapped because they had died alone, away from the humans, the souls they had entered into, who had on some level some agreement to praise or carry a soul over to the other side. But now I'm going to come at it from a different angle. Again, if you are an individual soul, how many times have you heard this? You were born as a result of this. Everything that happens in your life happens for a reason. Does dying alone happen because you chose it? And if you did choose to die alone, part of me really does think that that is a very determined choice. If you choose to die alone, what does that say to those souls I met stuck in that building who were still stuck there? Their souls, too, would have known that they had died alone. Their souls would have chosen to die alone. But did their souls choose that nobody would help them cross over? Dying alone. More implications than just on the surface. The contemplation of dying alone from a soul's perspective has multiple levels of, I think, perhaps lessons in it. However, a body passed, and that soul knowing that it is completely alone. How do you cross en masse in fear? And it's a prolonged fear. It isn't like a tsunami that hits and you're gone, and you may last a few days clinging to life because rescue doesn't come, or an avalanche, or your boat capsizing, or any number of other ways of dying. To know that you are in amongst many other souls, how does that affect you? How does that affect the soul? I know I'll be having very interesting journeys in the next few weeks. I haven't felt compelled at this point in time to journey on these questions, but I have been contemplating them, as I have said. We have been dying alone forever, but I don't know if we've ever died alone other than the Spanish flu, globally, that I'm aware of in history. However, we seem to have some fairly good indications of mass death. But I digress. In dying for so long, in such angst, if the soul has chosen this, if that's what we believe, that we choose our ending, what is then the job of the psychopomp? Is the job of the psychopomp providing the soul gets stuck? And I think there are going to be many, many stuck souls. Why? Why do I think that? I think that because when we are in a place of fear, sometimes the soul, at least the ones I've encountered in the dead, react one of two ways. When we are in throngs of dying in fear, many souls will reach out and cry out for the spirits who have been close to them, and those spirits respond. There are other people who don't know to cry out, won't cry out, or for some reason do not pay attention to the signs of gateways, doorways, waterways, whatever ways, to go for a homegoing, don't take it. As a person who does psychopomp, it will be interesting to encounter those souls. When I've encountered souls that have wandered for a very long period of time, these souls are lost. I think fear drives us to be lost. If we are living in fear, and in North America, we are certainly being sold fear. We are even lining up to buy it. And I don't mean lining up as a pun because we have to line up for things. I don't mean it in that way at all. But we are buying into the fear. Many people are buying into the fear. And understandably, I think there will be more lost souls because I don't think that everybody who dies alone dies in peace. I think people who die alone and die in fear die fighting. I think people who die alone fighting for breath literally die in trauma. dying and trauma affects the soul. Having a fear of dying and trauma affects the psychic bubble we live in. Having a fear of loved ones dying alone, horrible deaths, is a psychic trauma. A global pandemic is a psychic trauma. Whether the trauma for you is, it's all just a conspiracy, what are we freaking out for? Or if your trauma is, this is a horrible situation and I feel powerless, or I feel I have some power and could help. Ever side and in between on the spectrum you are, this is a trauma. It may not be for you personally, but you remain psychically affected in some form or other by the trauma that surrounds you. Whether you have a great shielding, whether you have the ability to slough things off, such as this, that's fantastic if you do. But many humans don't necessarily have the ability to create stops within their psychic field to remain unaffected by the group trauma and the group horror that is going on. We are not always able to choose how we are affected. We can choose how we sit in the affected, whether it is through meditation we sit to find peace, whether we numb out through some other addiction, whether we pretend the world is perfectly fine, whatever coping mechanism we are individually, collectively, socially doing, we are going to be affected by the social trauma that we're experiencing wherever we're living. The contemplation of death in these regards, I think, has a deeper impact on the soul. It has to have a heavier weight on the soul. I cannot psychically feel another time in history when the weight of fear and death has been so heavy for a prolonged period of time. The Spanish flu has a similar effect, but it feels different to me. I'm not sure why, but it feels almost like there's a better psychic relationship to it. And perhaps that's because it was 100 years ago and we have psychically cleaned it up, or we've moved through it, or maybe history just forgets the trauma, like bruises go away, like scars fade. That's a possibility. How we are coping as a soul through the process of dying. The spirit of death has visited. Now there are spirits that come in mass. For some it's the Valkyrie, for others it's the angel, for me it's Lady Death, for others it is death with possibly even the scythe. The personification of death still greets us. The personification of the archetype of death that greets us informs our soul. It informs our passage to positive or to not so positive, to fear, to not so fear. I don't know what determines each individual's passing. I don't, because I'm only one human and you're you and only you know you. But in the spirit world, it's a whole other story. Encountering the personification of death and the effects of the personification of death can really affect a soul. A soul who has committed suicide has an entirely different view of the personality of death. Intact is their fear of the personality of death, that they would rather stay in this realm than meet the personality death. I take that suicide as an example for the fear, the ability of fear to keep us stuck. If the coronavirus personification or face of that death is one that has trauma written all over it, can that death personification alter its face for the person dying if the person dying doesn't have a relationship to death or relationship to spirit? Interesting question for me. I don't have an answer. So I'm asking you all of these questions, dear listeners, for the very simple reason we are all in this to gain information. I'm not saying that that's the whole reason that we're alive is to gain information, but it is one of the benefits of dying with all of this information and bringing it back to the whole and the collective. The ability for the soul to travel on to the other world when it dies in the burden of psychic trauma, in the burden of social trauma, in the burden of, can have a disastrous effect. I suspect doing psychopomp work, and I know that there are more than one of you who are doing psychopomp work. Are you feeling any differences? Are you feeling more relief and gratitude from the people who have died that you're helping over than you have otherwise? I know when I've done psychopomp work for disasters, there are many, many people who are dazed and confused. If you die, I know that when I've come into hospitals, I really, really dislike hospitals. I feel when I walk into the doorway of a hospital, I don't know if you ever experienced this as a kid. When you're going down the hallway of a school and you hear a herd of children running up behind you, you know what that feels like. And there's that expectation of the body of, am I going to get jostled? And that's what it feels like to me when I enter a hospital. It feels like a herd of souls running towards me going, fuck, we're free, or whatever, right? I wonder, so sometimes when we do psychopomp work, it is like that rush of souls. And then there are other times when there are souls that are abandoned, who die alone by choice or die alone because they're abandoned. I run into those. When I do the spiritual work for the dead are haunting a house, that's a different type of death. That's a different type of spirit. Natural disasters have an effect on the soul because it happens so quickly. If we die in delirium, in high fever, there's a possibility as well of confusion in death because the mind is confused. Sometimes that confusion can lead into the upper realms of the mind. If we think of the mind as disassociated or the mind is breaking free of the body in a discombobulated state, that discombobulated state can affect how that soul crosses over. I've met many wandering souls going, I don't know where I am. When I've done depossession work, there are oftentimes souls have no clue that they're dead. The idea that we know exactly when we're going to die and we know exactly how it's going to happen and who's going to take us over, I call bullshit. I've run into way too many souls that have no flick-flack-and clue where they are, what corporeal state they are in, and whether or not they can go anywhere, let alone stay where they are. I want us to take some responsibility as individuals. Not that you're responsible, I don't want to put more weight on you, but there is a responsibility for us as compassionate, caring, enlivened souls to create with our breath, create with our voice, create with our thoughts, create with a fucking tea light candle, some prayer, some avenue, some way, some light to get to the other side. Dying alone doesn't mean you get a good transition. Dying alone, it's a frick-frackin' crapshoot is what it is. Do you follow the spirits who come to pass you over? Yea or nay? Some yea, some nay. Do you recognize you're dead? Some yea, some nay. Do you have fear of the personification of death so bad that you won't carry on? Some yea, some nay. You see where I'm going? Even in death, this shit's messy. Coronavirus is messy. Your soul moving is messy. Sometimes it's fucking brilliant. And you get to the other side and you're like, whoop, whoop. Everything happened according to plan. doesn't always happen. Contemplation of dying in the face of such a gaping mouth of death has to be terrifying. It has to be. Even dying in a hospital during the height of the pandemic must have been a horror. Dying in amongst such exhaustion, panic, fear, sickness. What did that do to the souls? How many hospitals? Oh, I can't even imagine walking into some of the hospitals that were overwhelmed. My prayers of strength to the warriors who walk in every single day. That really is the crux of it. Where are we now as a society? I like to think that I know a thing or two about death. I like to think that I've never encountered anything soul-wise as big as this, at least not in North America. This is a long time death. This is a long time dying. And there have been other periods, like when there have been huge volcanic eruptions, and there are Inuit stories that talk about a year when the sun never came, and the starvation and the fear of the people in the northern climates who, by the weight of the volcano erupting, did not see, or the seasons did not change. And I believe that would have been 2 years of worry, of death and panic. But there weren't 7 billion people. There weren't 2.5 of the 7 billion people contemplating that experience, that death. And I just use 2.5 obviously as a random number. I'm not saying that 7 billion people are going to concentrate on death at any one point in time, especially when there are lots of places in the world do not have as much access to heightened media as we do in North America, because we in North America do have a heightened media and a very monocular media as well at times. Dying alone, it is a contemplation for me. And I've been sitting with this for a while. And I really needed to share this with you, my constant listeners. I really did. I needed to ask you these own questions that are bumping around in my soul. I wanted to share some of the musings that I have. I have an interesting relationship with death. Death was supposed to take me a good number of years ago. I've outlived my life expectancy, but apparently not my use, or I would be long gone. I have felt the contemplation of death around me. I have felt the weight of death around me. I have felt fear around me. And I have felt the psychic trauma that surrounds us, the psychic trauma that informs our soul, the psychic trauma that the souls of our loved ones and the unknown ones have to cross over with. I would like to close by reading a prayer. I didn't write it. If I find the author, I will let you know who it is. I have read this prayer out loud more than once. I found it on Facebook, of all things. And I have changed it. One paragraph, anyway, I've added, in honor for dying alone. It's called Prayer for Sitting with the Unjustly Killed. I call to those who died in raging war, those who only wanted simple things, the joy of day, the calm of night. Blessed is your memory. I call to those who died from hate, those who were hurt by belief, from fueled fear, twisted tight, unleashed upon those seen as different. Blessed is your memory. I call to those who died by the power of the mother, the winds and storm, the fueled fire, the sweeping strength of the earth out of balance. Blessed is your memory. I call to those who died from hunger, from preventable disease, unneeded harm. I call to those who died poverty-stricken, struggling just to exist. Blessed is your memory. I call to those who died of the power of nature's wiles, the sickness, the fever, the suffocation, dying alone and afraid. Blessed is your memory. I remember you. I see you. I will not forget you. I will let the knowledge of this truth pass over and through me. I will remain ready to do the work I am called to do. Blessed is your memory. Blessed is you who listen. Blessed are you who care. Blessed are you, my sweet dear listeners, for sharing with me your time, your willingness to hear me in my musings, and blessings to you for stepping forward and for continuing to do the work silently or loudly, and everything in between, for the contemplation of dying alone. I am grateful for your time. Until next time.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.